Hi, I'm Jessica Jeans, and this is Linda Tonnesen. We are the co-founders of Growth Groups. I'm a licensed mental health counselor, and I work in South Florida with a practice called Guided by Grace. And in my time working with individuals and families, I saw a need to bring people together and have some community. And this helps people when they're in fellowship to get healing and growth. And I've had a history of working with Linda, and she is an expert and a certified facilitator and coach of spiritual and emotional growth facilitation. She's also an author. And so when we've worked together, we've kind of discussed a need in this community for groups so that people can connect and learn about how to look inside what they're going through alongside one another and get emotional freedom through that process. And so I reached out to Linda to join me in this effort in bringing a growth group community to South Florida. And she's got a lot to say. So I'm going to pass over to her, and she can talk about how we've seen a pandemic of fear and anxiety in our work. And so, Linda, tell us about you and why you're here.
Hi, thanks, Jessie. It's so good to be here. What we're seeing, I think Jessie sees in her private practice, and I'm seeing in my work too, is the pandemic, as she said, of fear. Fear of COVID, fear of the economy, the inflation, fear of the government, but also fear of how to make ends meet and how to get everything done. And it's just become and more a problem that's turned to anxiety and panic attacks, and the kids are having fear too. So we thought we should just stop a minute and talk about fear, maybe dive in and drill down and figure out what is this fear thing and what do we do with it. So first thing we want to talk about today is the difference between fear and anxiety, because they're similar. Yeah, and they're similar. Mm-hmm. They're both overwhelming feelings, and they're both can be paralyzing. And they both are a result of our thoughts. So what I like to talk about with fear is we find out when we really get in there and look at it is we have some control over it. We have some power over whether we're going to be run by fear or we're going to take charge of the fear. Now, it may not feel like that to you sometimes. And that's what we're going to talk about and give you some tools for that. Mm-hmm. The story that we tell ourselves about what might happen leads us to the emotions of fear, anxiety, scared, all those emotions that we try to run away from because they're so uncomfortable. So what's interesting, though, is faith is also the stories that we tell ourselves about what might happen. Faith and fear are just opposite ways to handle our unknown future. So first we'll talk about fear and how it happens in our minds, because there's two ways this emotion can show up. Both of them.
And they both have that fight or flight response. It shows up physiologically exactly the same. It starts as an alert in our body, but the thought that we're having directs the way that we respond. So the two ways that can go is I'm scared, which is vigilance. And we know this is a God-given emotion that's wired in us, right? So that we can catch, alert, danger. There's something coming to attack, or there's a threat for loss of someone or myself, physical danger, or also a loss of relationship, fear of rejection. The ultimate fear is being alone, losing love, ultimately.
That's right.
And so there's a job, we could talk about the job that fear has, that when we feel there's a threat in the room, it's looking for safety.
That's right.
And if we can't find that, then that sometimes might be where we can get stuck in a pattern of assuming we're in danger, and if we never really get to that safety. And so what fear needs is safety, and there's an alert there that goes off. So when we walk to our car in a dark, empty parking lot, we might feel that scared telling us that there could be danger, and that's vigilance.
That's right.
appropriate, and it's leading us to the legitimate need of scared, which is safety.
That's right.
And once we, right, and so you can go ahead and take over there. I know that once we get that safety met, then the fear, we'll say the scared in this context, the healthy scared, the healthy stress of the matter will dissipate.
That's right. That we think is a God-given emotion, to feel scared when we're in danger. And the only thing we need to do with that emotion, it's telling us we need to get to safety.
And we honor it.
And we honor, because if you do honor it, the scare goes away. If you hear
and the symptoms will process and move on.
That's right. And if you hear a thump in the middle of the night, you feel scared. If you turn on the light and realize, oh, that was the cat that just jumped off my bed and it was a loud thump, you're not scared anymore. We turn off the lights and go back to sleep. So that is the function of the God-given emotion of scared. And so that's a healthy one. We don't want to take that away. People who are not in touch with that healthy God-given emotion find themselves in real danger a lot of the time. If we didn't have that emotion, we could get hurt.
And I commonly see that leads to situations that some call panic. My body is just starting to freak out and I don't know why. I was just sitting there watching a show. If we're not recognizing the real fear in our life, the body will alert us in an abnormal way, an unhelpful way, because it's not informed. So the body will let us know.
Yes, that's true. So the other kind of feeling that we get that feels similar, but it becomes a state of being, we would call that anxiety. And Jesse, why don't you talk to us about anxiety? You see that a lot in your office.
Yeah, I mean, it's a more commonly accepted word in the mental health world, but we've really made a point here to define it as different than just the feeling of being afraid, as opposed to what we just described. Anxiety is when there's lies. It's a false perception of threat. Anxiety is a false perception of threat. It's believing there's threat when there's not actually threat. There's a lie going on.
Yeah.
I could say a lot more. I mean, there's different types. And there's different types in the diagnostic world that align with different lies. That's what's showing up in watching people get to the core.
Yeah. And like we said, both of these are about the thoughts in our minds. You have a thought that I'm in a parking lot and it's dark and I'm pretty vulnerable here. That leads us to feeling the emotion of fear and to go get safety. That's how it's supposed to work. But in anxiety, it's also a thought that's telling us something about what might happen or about the future. But it's what we say is it's not a valid thought. It's just something that could happen. I might get in a car accident if I drive right now. I might fail if I try that new thing. So it's a perception of what bad could happen that starts getting this anxiety rolling. And
and let me just add to that, Linda. When you get to the bottom of the symptoms or the body reactions, when it's anxiety and there's a lie going on, there's hundreds of cores there. Like I'm afraid like you said, I'm afraid I'm going to fail. I'm afraid I'm going to feel awkward. I'm afraid they're going to see what I'm feeling. I'm afraid my tears are going to come out. I'm afraid I'm having a heart attack. I'm afraid that they didn't call me. They're not okay. They didn't tell me when they got home. I'm afraid that if I don't check the door again, that someone's going to break in. And so there's always a theme with anxiety. There's always a theme, and it goes back to what you're about to tell us about the core beliefs, the beliefs that lead the thoughts.
Yeah, and we call this living in a state of fear. So if you're afraid because your teenager didn't call you when they got home, and something bad happened, it goes from there. Even if they call you, you still have another fear right behind it of what could have happened or what might happen next.
And it spirals.
We see in the Bible that God tells us that fear was sent to torment. So when you think about torment, and then you think about yourself when you're in an anxiety spiral of all the terrible things that are about to happen or could happen, and it's up to you to not get in those bad situations. That's
what if, right? Like the what ifs, and I gotta make sure.
It's torment, and that's exactly what fear does, and that's all fear can do. is
Right. It's an argument in our mind.
Yeah.
One's controlled and one's when we're getting to safety, we can actually surrender that argument.
Yes, and we'll talk about that more, how to get out of this situation. But first, we want to talk about what it is and what it isn't. So one way to look at it is often you're not in true physical danger. It's not like the scare that we talked about. There's something you can do and then it's gone. But you'll know you're in anxiety when there's no one thing you can do to make the danger go away because you're not in danger.
It's a rut. It's a rut in the brain that has become a pathway to fear. It's a pathway to fear. That's what anxiety is.
Yeah, and there's
it's
no
automatic.
Automatic, and there's no end to it.
And it's doom.
Yes, it's a threat. It's a threat that something is about to happen to you or a loved one. You're about to be abandoned. You're about to get into a terrible situation that you can't handle.
It's just lies, just being basically whispered into our
shouting into your mind of, but what if? But what if? You better do something. That's
you're gonna miss something.
That's a big one. That's a big one. So it's the state of fear that we're talking about that describes what is anxiety. Yeah. So there's some people, I'll give me for an example of that. I didn't have any fears. I couldn't recognize any fears. If people would say, what are you afraid of? I couldn't think of anything.
Here's your trophy.
But what I found out is if you're not in touch with your fear, it could be that you were born into a family where that was a norm. Everybody had fear. There was a lot of chaos. That's all it takes. We don't look at
could be fear.
Yeah, constant unknowing. We don't know what's ahead. Constant chaos is a conditioned environment of fear. And so if you're raised in that, you don't recognize it as something any different. You think everybody feels that way. But other words I could sure identify with was overwhelmed, stressed, scattered. Those words, the way to look at them is if I'm overwhelmed, what I'm afraid of is that I'm not going to get it all done. If I'm stressed, if I'm obsessed, what I'm afraid of is that I'm going to forget something.
I'd like to jump in on the obsessed about. I'll let you add if there's anything else you want to talk about when you were overwhelmed, right? Overwhelmed. That's what you're talking about.
Yes. And if I feel inadequate in a situation, I'm afraid I'm not enough. So that's how those words actually can help you see what you're afraid of. What is the real anxiety about? Go ahead, Jess.
When my fear shows up, not with the what if syndrome or the something's wrong with me syndrome or the I'm going to be judged. I'm naming anxiety disorders in the scientific world right now. These are the different roots. Not fear, not that I'm going to be judged. I don't have any physical trauma that that is unresolved at this point where I say I'm going to get hurt, danger's coming, or even just that what if syndrome that I referred to, where we're just in a constant state of catastrophes coming because somehow we developed that rut of thinking. Mine is I'm taking risks, I'm jumping into things, I'm helping others when they're afraid, and I'm not feeling that I'm afraid. But the way it shows up for me, which is another diagnostic route, is obsession. So when I am hyper vigilant in that way, as opposed to the other ways I just listed, it doesn't feel like afraid. It feels like I'm working hard. And the root of that for me, we're always trying to get control, and an illusion of control is trying to predict the future. But for me, I obsess over how I'm going to fix the problem. I'll go read enough till I basically have a degree in something, or strive hard, or perfectionism is another way that can look. And so some of us think that we can't identify with fear because there's so many different ways it can look, but it's really based on just a few different core beliefs.
Yeah.
So mine's obsession, and it's based on the belief that I'm not getting it right.
Right. So if you can't quite connect to what it is, you could look at yourself and see yourself. Do I strive? Do I push? am I exhausted? Sometimes that's the root of the exhaustion, is I can never let my guard down because we tell ourselves because I have so much to do.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
why
Yeah.
we have so much to do is where there's a fear of, why do I have so much to do? Why am I making this hard? What am I trying to avoid happening
Mhm.
by controlling my schedule and controlling everyone else's schedule? And we'll get more into
Mhm.
the control part of fear because it's a really big coping
Yeah.
mechanism.
I do think it's worth mentioning here, and maybe this is a good stopping point because we're doing another few more informational teachings here coming up in a series. But I think it's worth mentioning that we can identify when we're in fear by checking in with our body.
Yeah.
So that might be just a good tip to leave here. And this is something that we've done a lot in our work, is noticing what is the physical trigger. And when I say our, I don't mean the mental health work that I'm in. I mean the background that Linda and I've worked in, where we're doing body work. We're looking at where these emotions are existing currently in our physical body.
Yeah.
And if you read about it in the medical world, you're going to see systems in your body that are affected. But the short-term indicators are the flushing in the face, the tense stomach, the muscles, holding my breath, writing lists over and over for me, double checking for some. But I guess when our thoughts are racing, that's another one. And the one you mentioned that I love is when we're not aware of our fear, we could notice we're fatigued, and it shouldn't be.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. It can hide. Yeah. So this is just a good starting point, and we wanted to just explain the difference between being vigilant of true threat and recognizing that you're stuck in hypervigilance when there's not threat. And we call that anxiety. And we believe that there is a pathway back to peace when you get to the root of it. And there's a lot of tricks along the way that you can learn to ground yourself until you really work through that. Is there anything else you want to say, Linda?
Well, I just want to end with saying that all people struggle with this. You're not the only one at all. And some people, it's running them. We call it, it's running you, to a greater extent than other people, but everyone can identify in some way with feeling scared, but also with feeling anxiety. So the next few recordings that we do will be to talk about what do you do now that you see it, now that you understand it, now what? So
now what? And that's where we'll leave it. Well, thanks for listening today, guys, and we'll get back to you soon with the next part of our series on now what. Take care. Bye.